Hi everyone, welcome you all. As part of today's video, we are going to see how we can test stored procedure. So before that, let us try to understand what is stored procedure and what are the advantages of stored procedure. And then we will see how we can create our stored procedures in the database. And then once you create your stored procedure, how we can call the stored procedure, that we will see practically. And once you understood about the stored procedure, then we will see how we can write the test cases for the stored procedure. And finally, we will see how we can test stored procedures. So now let us start with what is stored procedure. So the stored procedure is basically a block of SQL statements. So normally when I write a SQL statement, let us say select star from say table name, so that will retrieve the data. So if I want to execute the same query multiple times, so we need to write the same query again and again, right? So for example, let's go to the database. And here I'm trying to execute one simple statement. Let's say select a star from customers. So I'm just executing this query. And what this query will do is this particular query will return the data from the table, right? So when I execute this, this will give you a data from the customers table. But again and again, multiple times I want to execute this statement. So then what we need to do is we need to copy the same statement again and again. Then we have to execute all the statements. And again, this particular query we cannot save anywhere else. So every time we need to write this query, and whenever you want to execute this and whenever you want to retrieve the data from the table, so you need to write this particular query. And basically this query, it directly hit the database table and get the data, and we cannot store this query anywhere else. So what stored procedure will do is stored procedure will wrap multiple SQL statement or single or multiple SQL statements. And that stored procedure we can save as a file. And whenever you want to invoke those statements, and we can just call the stored procedure. And stored procedure will execute those set of statements. And basically a stored procedure is a block of SQL statement. We can specify one statement or multiple statements together inside a block. That is called as a stored procedure. And stored procedure sometimes will take some parameters also. And like we can say input parameters, sometimes we can also, the stored procedure will also store the data in the output parameters. And we can save the stored procedure and we can reuse multiple times. And we can also pass the parameters into a stored procedure. Now, what is an advantage of stored procedure? And basically the stored procedures will basically reduce the network traffic. So normally what happens is whenever you run multiple queries, right, from the application. So if I just take the GUI applications, whenever you do some transactions, so many queries internally will execute against the database. So instead of executing complex queries between your application and MySQL database, we can simply create a stored procedure, and we can just invoke the stored procedure from the application. And that stored procedure will talk to the database, and the stored procedure internally execute those queries. So that will reduce the lot of network traffic between our MySQL server and application. So that is the main usage of stored procedure. And what is another advantage? So centralize business logic in the database. So sometimes we can also implement the business logic in stored procedures, and that stored procedure will be called from the application. And once you create your business logic, we can reuse that business logic in multiple places in our application. And that is another usage of stored procedure. And also it will make our database more secure. So instead of suppose your application is doing multiple operations or transactions, and if you directly hit the, if your queries directly hit the database tables, there is no more security there. Suppose when you created a stored procedure, and that stored procedure internally talk to the database tables, internally execute the statements or queries. So as a database administrator, they no need to grant any privileges on the tables or any database objects to the application or user. And they can just grant the privileges on stored procedure. So as an application or as a user, we can just invoke the stored procedure, and that will give you the results. But internally, what stored procedure will do? The stored procedure actually execute the SQL statements and talk to the database objects. So in that case, the stored procedure is more secure. So all tables or database objects we can manage securely. So that is the main, they are the main advantages of using stored procedures in database. Okay, so now we will see how we can create stored procedures, especially in MySQL database. Okay, so as I said before, stored procedures sometimes we'll take some parameters, and may not take any parameters. Sometimes it will take single parameter, multiple parameters, and sometimes stored procedure also will return some data, and that data we can store in the output parameters. And various types of stored procedures we can write in the database. Now, especially here, I'm going to show you how we can write stored procedure or how we can develop the stored procedure in MySQL database. But if you go to another databases like SQL Server or Oracle, the syntactically there will be different. There will be some difference. Okay. Now let us follow the MySQL syntax while creating the stored procedures. So for that, I'm just connecting to my MySQL database. So here, if I just look at here, I already have some tables. So we already imported these tables in the previous videos. I have shown you that already. So currently I don't have any stored procedures in this particular classic models database. Now let us create a few number of stored procedures, and later we will see how we can write the test cases for those stored procedures and how we can execute those test cases and how we can test the stored procedure. That we will see that later. So first, let us focus on how we can develop or how we can implement stored procedures in the database. So how we can do it? Simply go to the SQL editor, and here how to create a stored procedure. So we need to follow syntax. So what is the syntax here is we need to use create procedure. So procedure is also one of the database component. So if you create something, we have to use a create command, which is basically data definition language command. Okay. So in MySQL, especially MySQL, when you write any statement like this, suppose let's say select a star from customers. Okay. And what is the endpoint of this particular statement? So normally we say semicolon. So after this statement, I write one more query like this. Let's say select a star from, let us say, orders. So these are two statements I have written, but the second statement syntactically correct. But why it is giving an error? Because the first statement we have not ended here. So to end that particular statement, we use semicolon as a delimiter. Okay, semicolon is representing the end of the statement. And then we can execute the second statement. So after second statement, we don't have any more statements. So here it is not giving any error. So why I'm explaining this is semicolon is acting as a separator or a delimiter in MySQL. But when you create your stored procedure, so normally what happens is in the stored procedure, I told you before, it is a block of statements, right? Suppose when I create a stored procedure, now here we will create multiple statements, right? When you create a stored procedure here, we will write multiple statements, and here it will start. Let's say we will use a begin keyword, and here it will use end keyword. So again, here every statement is end with the semicolon like this, right? But what is a end point? Here it is started, stored procedure is started, and where it is end, here end is a keyword which is representing ending of stored procedure. So when I execute this stored procedure, what happens is MySQL will consider these statements separately, like individual statements, because every statement is end with the semicolon. But I want to execute the entire stored procedure as a single statement. So for that, we need to create our own delimiter. So for example, in MySQL especially, we have a keyword called delimiter. So delimiter, and here we can use any delimiter. We can use something like $, or we can use hash, we can use // This is our own delimiter. Now this particular delimiter we have to set here. So now this is a stored procedure definition and begin, and here we will write all the statements, and this stored procedure is ending here, and this is a delimiter. Now after completion and execution of your stored procedure, again we have to set delimiter, default delimiter. What is that? Semicolon. Okay, why we need to do like this? Because in stored procedure, there are multiple statements we have to execute. So each and every statement will end with the semicolon. But so when you're executing the stored procedure, what happens? The stored procedure statements will be considered as different statements. But I want to execute the entire stored procedure as a single statement. So for that, we need to define our own delimiter by using this keyword delimiter //. And here the same delimiter we have to use at the end of the stored procedure. And after completion of writing and creation of stored procedure, then we need to again reset to delimiter semicolon. This is the default delimiter in MySQL, and this is applicable only on MySQL especially. Okay. Now with this understanding, so let us try to create some basic stored procedures. So for that, what we need to do is first we need to set our delimiter. So for that, I'm just creating a small delimiter keyword. So I say delimiter and slash slash I'm using as a delimiter. So how to create a stored procedure? So to create a stored procedure, we use a keyword called create procedure. So whichever database object you are going to create, that we need to specify, like create table, create view, create procedure, create function, like this. So here we are creating stored procedure. So create procedure. Then we need to specify the name of the procedure. So I'm going to create one procedure. And when I call that procedure, which will return the customer's information. So normally what you will do, we will just say select star from customers. That will return the customer's data. But if you want to save that query in future, I want to execute that query multiple times. So then you need to just create a stored procedure and you can save it. And the later on, you can just call the procedure whenever you want to get the customer's data. So now I'm going to create a new stored procedure. I say create procedure, and I will give some name to the procedure, that is select all customers. And the procedure always follow the brackets, because sometimes the procedure will take arguments like input parameters and output parameters. And sometimes there are no arguments. So in that case, we can just put empty brackets. And inside this, we use a keyword called begin. So begin keyword we have to use. So whenever you use a begin keyword, so here we need to write all your SQL statements. So for example, I say select star from customers. Select a star from customers. And only single statement I'm providing inside the stored procedure. And after that, I want to end this block. And how to end this block? I can say end. And here we should not use semicolon again, because we specified our own delimiter. So that delimiter we have to use. And after completion of that, again, we have to reset our own delimiter, that is semicolon. Okay, so this is how we need to create a simple stored procedure in MySQL. Now let us execute the everything. So which is going to create a new stored procedure, and where it is going to create with this name, select all customers, and where it is created under the stored procedures, it is created. So when I refresh this, you will see the new stored procedure which is created here. You can just look at here, select all customers. So select all customers is created. So rest of them previously is already available. So this is a new stored procedure which is created, select all customers. Okay, and previously there are few stored procedures are already available. So let me just drop them. So you can just right click, drop stored procedure, and this will automatically drop those stored procedures. Okay, now this is a new stored procedure we created and it is automatically saved here. But how to call the stored procedure? How to invoke the stored procedure? So to call the stored procedure, we will use a keyword called call, and then specify the name of the stored procedure. And here we're not passing any argument, just execute the statement. So when you execute this statement, which will also internally execute the select star from customer. So this is giving the data like this. So we have just created a simple stored procedure in MySQL, and we are able to call this stored procedure whenever you want. So you don't need to write the select statement every time, and you don't need to create the stored procedure every time. So once you created your stored procedure, which will be stored under stored procedure section, and this particular stored procedure, you can call it anytime by using call statement. Okay, so now we have just created simple stored procedure. So let us see a few more stored procedure and different ways we can create a stored procedures, because some stored procedures will take arguments, and some stored procedures will also take will also return some output, right? So now we will see a different type of stored procedures, how we can create them. So let me just clear them and remove this. So now I'm just going to create one more type of stored procedure. So this time I'm going to create a stored procedure with one single parameter. So if the stored procedure taking a single parameter, how we can create a stored procedures? So as usual, we need to first define the delimiter. So for that, I can say delimiter // and you can use any delimiter. You can say $, hash, // dot, whatever you want. So this is a delimiter I'm setting, and then I'm going to create a stored procedure. So how we can create? By using create keywords, create procedure. And here I'm going to create one procedure. So basically, which will take a city name as an input, and then it will return the customers who are from that particular city. So in the customers table, there are so many records are there, right? In city is also one of the column in the customer. So I want to print the customer details who are belongs to specific city. Okay. So normally how we will write the statement, select star from customers where city equal to so and so city we will specify. if it is write a normal query. But for that, I can just write a stored procedure. And whenever you want to get the data, I will call the stored procedure by just passing the city name. So let me show you how we can create the stored procedure. So create procedure, and I'll give one name here, select all customers by city. And here I will pass one input parameter, that is your city name. So whenever you pass an input parameter, we have to use something called in keyword. In is representing input parameter. And here I'm giving some variable called, I say my city, and the type of my city is varchar of, I say 50. And then this is a definition. So create procedure, procedure name, and this is the input parameter. In is representing, this is the input parameter, and the type of the variable is varchar of 50. Now here we need to begin the stored procedure implementation. So for that we need to create begin. So SQL is a case sensitive, it is not a case sensitive language. So you can use uppercase characters or lowercase characters. So I say begin. Inside this, I'm going to write a select query. So normally how we can retrieve the data based on the city, I say select star from customers where city equal to, and whatever city we are getting as an input parameter, I'm just comparing that city with our city here. Now this particular query actually return the data. So whoever is customers or belongs to this particular city, the data will be returned. And after that, I'll end this block. And this is a delimiter. And again, we have to set the default delimiter. I say delimiter semicolon. Okay, this is a creation of one more stored procedure by passing the single parameter. Let's execute this again. So now it is again created a new stored procedure. Now, if I just refresh this, you can see here, select all customers by city, which is created. So how we can call this now? So if we want to call this stored procedure, we can say you can use call keyword. So I say call and name of the stored procedure. And here we need to pass the value, city value, because this is expecting one argument or parameter. So I'm just passing one argument here. I say Singapore. Okay, if there are any records found in the table with the Singapore, so those customers data will be written by the stored procedure. Now semicolon. So execute this statement, and this will return the data from the customers table who belongs to Singapore city here. So this is the same stored procedure we can call again multiple times in multiple places. So once you create a stored procedure, so this is permanently available. So whenever you want to call the stored procedure, so which will provide the data from the tables. Okay, and sometimes this stored procedure also get the data from multiple tables, not only single table. Sometimes we can also write the query which will retrieve the data from multiple tables, right? So now we just created one more stored procedure which will take single parameter or one parameter. Okay, now I'll show you one more stored procedure, and this time this particular stored procedure will take two different parameters. Now how we can do that? Okay, so let me just close this. Let me show you one more stored procedure we will try to create. And this time we are going to pass two input parameters. Okay. So what is my stored procedure is, I'm just going to create one more stored procedure which will print all the customers data based on the city and pin code. So what we have done in the previous stored procedure, we are just passing only city, and whereas customers are belongs to that particular city, which is data is printed. But this time I want to validate city along with the pin code. Both should be matched, and those customers I want to print. Now, how we can write the stored procedure? So now we need to first set the delimiter. Say delimiter, right? So delimiter is // and now let us start writing the stored procedure. I say create procedure, and I'll give some name to the procedure like select all customers by city and pin. And now two parameters we need to pass. So if I just look at the customers table, so there is a city column is available, and also postal code is also available. That is basically pin code. Okay, so this is varchar of 15, and city is also varchar of 50. Now here we need to take two input parameters. So for that, what we need to, we have to use in keyword, and in is representing the input parameter. So I say my city, and this is a varchar type. So I say varchar of 50. And what is another parameter? Pin code, right? So for that again, input parameter, I say p code. This is also varchar of varchar of 15. All right, so this is a declaration. So we just declare the stored procedure. So this will take the two arguments, city name and pin code. And now we need to begin the stored procedure. So by using begin keyword, inside this, I'm writing the select query. I say select start from customers table where, and there is a city column is there, right? So we need to match this column. So city equal to whichever city we want to match with parameter city, right? We are getting the city value here. And if the actual column value of city is matching with our my city, then only those records will be retrieved. And not only this, we need to add one more condition, and we need to also check P code. That is basically postal code, right? That you need to specify. I say postal code equal to P code. So this is the exert statement. Now, after that, we can end this stored procedure. And again, we set the delimiter with the default one, which is semicolon. So I say delimiter semicolon. So now this will create another stored procedure, which will take city and the pin code, two input parameters, and return the data. So let's execute this. And this is just created a stored procedure. But if we want to get the result from the stored procedure, we need to explicitly call the stored procedure by using call command or call statement. Okay. So call and specify the stored procedure name. And here we need to pass two arguments, city name and pin code. Both we need to pass. So let me pass two values. Let us say city name is Singapore. Because it's a varchar, we need to pass in the double quotations or single quotation. I say Singapore. Okay, Singapore. And this is a country. This is a city. And then I specify the pin code. So this is also varchar type. So I can just provide the pin code. I say 07 and 9903. So now this particular stored procedure is taking two arguments. And what this will return? This will return the data from the customers table where city and postal code should be matched. So when I execute this statement, and every statement should end with the semicolon. So when you execute this, now you can see there is only one record which is there in the table, which is having city is Singapore, postal code is 079903. So which is exactly matching. So whenever you call the stored procedure just by passing country and pin code, so corresponding data will be displayed from the table. So this is how we can write stored procedure, which will take two input parameters, Okay. So now let us create one more stored procedure. Okay, one more stored procedure, and basically which will accept the customer number and returns the total number of orders that customer order, like total number of orders that were shipped, cancelled, or resolved, or disputed. So because the order is having multiple status, like, so maybe the order is shipped, order may be cancelled by the customer, order may be resolved, or order may be in disputed state. So my stored procedure like this. So I will create one more stored procedure here, and that stored procedure will take an input parameter. So what is that input parameter? So that will take input parameter, all our input parameter, and also output parameters. That means the stored procedure will take customer number as an input parameter. Let me write it here. Okay, so stored procedure will take customer number or customer ID, or let's say customer number is a parameter, input parameter. And now this should display the shipping status, like it is already shipped or not, cancel the product or not, resolved or not, dispute or not. There are multiple statuses we can find. Okay, so let me just show you the orders table. Now go to the MySQL, and we already have orders table right here. So let us find the data, what it is having. So select a star from order. So one customer can order multiple products, right? And the product information can be, status can be shipped, or sometimes status will be cancelled, or sometimes the status will be resolved, or sometimes the status will be disputed, right? So we need to find out, like we need to write a stored procedure which will accept a customer number as an input. And what it should return? It should return the total number of orders. Total number of orders that were shipped or cancelled or resolved or disputed. Okay, so because the order status will be multiple, like it will be shipped or cancelled, resolved or dispute, we need to find out. And if I pass a customer number and that particular customer, how many orders they have done, and among those orders, how many are shipped, how many are cancelled, how many are resolved, how many are disputed. So I need to find out through this stored procedure, and just want to pass one input parameter, and the stored procedure will return multiple things. So how many output parameters is required? So 4 parameters are required. These 4 are output parameters: shipped, cancelled, resolved, and dispute. Okay. Now let us create one stored procedure which will take input parameters and also output parameters. Go back to the MySQL. Let me just close this. Clear? Right. So now let me create a new stored procedure. So how to create here? First, we need to set the delimiter. So delimiter // and here I'm taking create a new stored procedure. So let me write the piece of code here. So this is a stored procedure. So let me explain how I have created this stored procedure. So here create procedure is a keyword, and this is the name of the procedure. Get order by customer number. And here these are the parameters. So you can write these parameters in the single line or in the multiple lines. So customer number is a input parameter, and shipped, cancelled, resolved, disputed. So these are all output parameters. So we have specified the out keywords. And here it is stored procedure started. And this is actually comment, which we can use. -- is a comment in SQL, MySQL. So now here I have written first query. What it will do is select count star into shipped from orders, where customer number equal to customer _ number and status equal to shipped. So how this exact query will return is, which will count number of orders from the customer, and whose customer number is this one, and the status is shipped. So if this condition is matched, it will return some records, and we will count those records. Count star will count those records and put that number in a shipped variable. Okay. And similarly cancel. So select count star into cancelled is a variable from orders, where customer number equal to customer numbers. What is this customer number? We are passing as an input parameter, which we will compare with the actual column value in the table, and status is cancelled. So if there are any cancelled orders, this particular variable will capture it. Similarly, resolved and disputed, and end of the stored procedure, and delimiter we set to default. So let me just create this stored procedure. Now it is created. So how we can call the stored procedure now? So we need to pass one input parameter, that is your customer number, and this will return 4 outputs, like shipped orders, number of shipped orders, number of cancelled orders, number of resolved orders, number of disputed orders. So how we can call the stored procedure? So to call the stored procedure, now this time we need to create 2 statements. One is, first we need to call the stored procedure, right? So let me use call keyword, call name of the stored procedure, and here we need to pass the input parameter. So let me just pass customer ID, let's say customer number, I say 141. Okay, 141 is the input parameter. But what this will return? So finally, this particular stored procedure will store the data in shipped, cancelled, resolved, and disputed. And these are the output parameters we are specified here, right? So now we need to capture that output data in 4 different variables. So how we can define the variables? By using @ symbol. I say shipped, comma, @cancelled, comma, @resolved, comma, disputed. So whatever names we have used in this query, the same names we have to specify with the @ symbol, so that whatever the data we have stored in these variables will be stored in these variables again. And now when I execute this call statement, it will not return any data. So what we need to do is, after execution of this, we need to select actual data from these variables. We need to write another statement, which is select a statement. And here we have to print the data which is there in this variable. So @shipped, comma, @cancelled, @resolved, and @disputed. So there is another select statement is required. So when I execute these 2 statements, then you will exactly get how many orders are shipped, how many orders are cancelled, how many orders are resolved, and how many orders are disputed by this particular customer ID. Okay. So this is how we need to just create a stored procedure and call the stored procedure. Again, if you want to print this data, we need to write another select statement. So this is how we can create a stored procedure which will take input and also output parameters. Okay, input and output parameters. So now let me create one more type of stored procedure. Okay, so now let us clear this. So let me show you how to create one more type of stored procedure. Let's say there are multiple conditions will be there sometimes. Let's say I want to get customer shipping data. Like suppose when I pass customer number, okay, when I pass a customer number, and automatically the stored procedure will should return like how many days it will take for shipping, or 2 days or 3 days or 5 days, based on the country of the customer. Okay, so the customer will live in some country, like maybe USA, UK or whatever. So based on the country name, it will take some time to ship the product. So I want to display how many days it will take for shipping specific to that country. Now let me just show you a small flow chart, and then we will implement the store procedure. So here I will take customer country as an input, right? So customer country as an input I will take. And once you take the customer country, so if the customer country of not customer country, first of all, we will take the customer ID, and based on the customer ID, we will find customer country. And if the customer country belongs to USA, then my store procedure should return 2-day shipping. If the customer country belongs to Canada, then it should return 3-day shipping. And then if the customer country belongs to any other country, then my store procedure should display 5-day shipping. So this is my requirement of store procedure. Right. So now let us see how we can implement this store procedure in database. So understand this flowchart, and based on this, we will follow. But as an input parameter, we need to pass a customer ID or customer number. And based on the customer number, our store procedure itself will find out the customer country from the table, and accordingly, it will fetch the multiple conditions. Now, let me just try to write a store procedure here, and then I will go through this. Now you can just look at here. This is a store procedure which we have created. So delimiter I set to // and store procedure name is get customer shipping. And here there are 2 parameters are defined. One is input parameter. The other one is a output parameter. So input parameter means what? P customer number. That means I need to pass the customer number, and also P shipping, product shipping. So this is actual output parameter. So whatever the store procedure is returning, that output will be stored in this variable. And input parameter and output parameter both are defined in the declaration. Now it starts the begin section. In the begin section, I have declared a simple variable here, customer country variable. This is a declare keyword will be used to define a simple a variable. Customer country, this is a variable name, and the type of the variable is varchar of 100. So now here, this is actual query which we have written. So select country. What is the country here? One of the column in the customers table. So select a country into customers country. So whatever country we have in the table, that country we are storing into this variable. This is we already declared here from customers table. So what exactly it is meaning? From the customers table, take the country value and put it into customer country variable. And what is the condition? Where this customer number, so this P customer number is equal to customer number in the customer table. So if the customer is matching with the customer number, which we provided, based on that, it is getting the country name and storing into this variable. Now here they have created something called case statement, programming statements. It is just like a switch case statement in Java. So what exactly we are doing here is we are checking whether this country, customer countries belongs to USA, then set P shipping equal to 2-day shipping. If the customer country is Canada, then set product shipping equal to 3-day shipping. So what is this P shipping? P shipping is an output variable which we have declared in the time of procedure. Right. So as soon as your particular condition is met, then we are adding this value to this particular P shipping. That's the output parameter, and this case keyword is end here, and the end section is representing the end of the store procedure. So what exactly this store procedure will do is this will take customer number as an input, and based on the customer number, it will fetch the country into this variable. Based on the country, it will store the shipping time into this particular output parameter, that is P shipping. Okay, now we entered the stored procedure. Now let us call the stored procedure by passing the customer ID. So how to call it? We use call statement, call, and name of the stored procedure, get the customer shipping, call get customer shipping. And here I'm passing the customer ID or customer number, let's say 112. And here we need to specify the variable also, right? Because this stored procedure will store this data in P shipping, and that variable we need to specify here. So at the rate, I just create one output variable here, because whatever the value the stored procedure is set, that value we will store, or we will hold that value in one more variable here. And now at the rate shipping is having exact value that we need to print by using another select statement, select at the rate shipping. So when I execute these two statements, so first of all, let us create the stored procedure. Now let me select all these things, and now it is created. If I just refresh the stored procedure, so now you can see here, get the customer shipping. So you can see get the customer shipping, the stored procedure is created. Now let me call the stored procedure by passing ID and output parameter. So in this output parameter, it will hold this value like 2-day shipping or 3-day shipping or 5-day shipping, whatever. And then I'm printing this value here. Let's execute these two statements. So now you can see the shipping is 2-day shipping. Why? Because this particular ID, whatever I'm passing, this customer belongs to USA country. So that is the reason it is giving 2-day shipping. Okay, let me just give some other value. Let's say I pass 260. Okay, now execute. So now it is giving 3-day shipping, because this particular 260 customer belongs to Canada country. Okay, and let us say one more customer ID, let's say 353. And when I execute this, this will give you 5-day shipping. That means what? This customer belongs to some other country other than USA and Canada. So this is how we can create our stored procedures, and we can call the stored procedure. And sometimes a stored procedure will handle the exception also. Whenever you pass some invalid input data to the stored procedure, so stored procedure also will send some exception. So we should handle that exception and to proceed further. And now I'll show you one more type of stored procedure which will able to handle the exception, or we can say error handling. Okay, so suppose when you pass invalid input, definitely the stored procedure will throw some error or throw some exception. But as a stored procedure developer, so we need to handle that. Okay, so let me show you one more stored procedure which will handle the error. So for that, let me clear it and close this. Let me create one more type of stored procedure which will handle error. So for that, we need one more table which is already there. You can just look at supplier products. Okay, let us see what is the data we have in this table. I say select star from supplier products. Okay, let me just execute this. So currently there are some data elements are there, supplier ID, some product ID is there. So supplier ID is 111 is there, product ID is 123 is there. Okay, now if I just describe the table, let's see what it contains. I describe the table name. And yeah, so supplier ID, product ID. So one product can be supplied by multiple suppliers, right? So similarly, one supplier can supply multiple products. So many to many relationship, right? So here, if I just look at here, both are primary keys. That means what? This is basically composite key. Means what? The combination of supplier ID, product ID should be unique. For example, when I pass product ID, supplier ID 1, product ID 1, this is a unique record. When I pass product ID 1, sorry, supplier ID 1, product ID 2, this is another record. But again, if I say 1,1, this is not allowed, because the combination of supplier ID, product ID is already there in the table, right? So this is not allowed. This is the duplicate, because it is a composite key. It's a combination of supplier ID, product ID. So supplier ID can be repeated. Product ID is also can be repeated, but the combination of supplier ID and product ID should not be repeated. So this is the problem in this. So let me just write a stored procedure through which we will try to insert the data in the table. So far we have seen stored procedure only which will return the data by using select command. Now this time I will show you how we can insert the data in the table using stored procedure. So let us create one simple stored procedure, And before that, let me just clear the data in this table. So for that, I can execute delete star from supplier products. So let me delete all the data from the table. So I think delete from suppliers. Okay, so now all the data is deleted. Now if I just say select a star from supplier products, and it doesn't have any data now. Okay, now let us create one stored procedure, and through which I will insert the data into the stored procedure. Okay, so table is already there. So supplier products is already there. So now I'm going to create a stored procedure. So this is our stored procedure. So let me explain what exactly it will work. So initially delimiter I said / and create a procedure. So this is the name of the stored procedure, insert supplier product. And this will take two input parameters. One is supplier ID, the other one is product ID. Okay, this is the input parameter. This is also input parameter. So one is supplier ID, the other one is a product ID. Both are integer type of data. Now here it begins the stored procedure, and here we mentioned something called handler. Okay, handler is nothing but in programming languages we can call them as exceptions, right? Same thing here. If this particular stored procedure is throwing the 1060 error, and then our program or our stored procedure will return this particular statement, duplicate error encountered. And similarly, if you make any mistake or any syntax error in the stored procedure, then it will throw some SQL exception. Then this will give you message to the user like SQL exception encountered. Similarly, there is another exception is also handled. So these three statements especially written to handle the exceptions. If the user is provided some invalid data, then automatically these statements will handle those exceptions. Rest of the code will be proceeded, and then it will give you the valid statement to the user, so that user can understand he provided some invalid content or invalid input to the procedure. Okay, some stored procedures also return some exceptions. If the user is provided some invalid data at runtime, so stored procedure should be able to handle that. Instead of throwing an exception, it should give a meaningful message to the user. Okay, so let me just create this stored procedure. So here I have defined multiple exceptions, and what basically this stored procedure will do, this is basically insert a new record in this table, and which table it is, supplier products. So insert into supplier products, and whatever the data we are passing like supplier ID and product ID, so those two values will be inserted in this particular table, which is supplier products. And this statement, what this will do, once it is inserted, then it will find out how many records are there in the suppliers products table. It will return select the count star from supplier product where supplier ID equal to in supplier ID. So whatever supplier ID we pass here, which will compare it, and it return how many number of IDs are created in the table. Okay, this is both are input parameters. Now this is a stored procedure. So let's execute this, and it will create a new stored procedure. Now if I just refresh here, this will show you one more stored procedure. Select all customers by city and pin code, and not this one, insert supplier product, right? It is there. Okay, here it is. See, insert supplier product. Now how to call this stored procedure? So to call the stored procedure, we can use call statement, call insert supplier product. So currently we don't have any records in the table, right? Let me just execute select command. Select a star from supplier products. When I execute this command, so currently we don't have any data in this. Now I'm going to insert the data in the table through stored procedure. Okay, now let me just, I already created this stored procedure. So now we need to call the stored procedures. How to call it? By using call statement. Call name of the stored procedures, which is insert supplier product, and here we need to pass the two parameters. What are those parameters? Supplier ID and product ID. And I say 1, 1 I'm passing. Okay, so this will insert one new record in the table. Okay, now it is inserted. Now let me just pass two more records. 1, 1 we passed. So 1, 2 and 1, 3. Because the combination of supplier ID and product ID is a composite primary key. But here supplier ID can be repeated and product ID can be also repeated. But the combination of supplier ID and product ID should not be repeated. So these three data elements are perfectly right. So when I execute this, all three records are inserted. Now, if I just look at select star from, also it will show you the record here, because stored procedure also return the counter. Only three records we have inserted through stored procedure, so which is returning count 3. But now observe this. Suppose I already have 3 records with this combination. Now again I'm trying to insert 1, 3. So then what you should do? This will throw some exception. But that also should able to handle by the stored procedure, and it should give a meaningful message in the output window. So let me try to insert the same record again, 1, 3 combination. Then what happens? Here you can see this. Duplicate keys, error encountered. So the same combination of keys we already inserted into the table. But even though we specified or we pass some invalid input, still our stored procedure is handle the exception, handle that error by using this handler. So actually this will throw 1062 error exception, and that is handled by the stored procedure, and it is giving this message in the output window. Okay. So this is a implementation of stored procedure, which will handle the errors or handle the exceptions. Okay. So how many stored procedure which we have created so far? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stored procedures, 6 different type of stored procedures we have created or we have developed. And also we have seen how to call the stored procedures by passing input parameters and by specifying the output parameter. So this is all about development part. We have implemented or we have developed the stored procedures on top of database. So what we have seen so far is we have just seen what is stored procedure, advantage of stored procedure, how to create a stored procedures. And also we have seen how to call stored procedures by using call statement. But how we can write the test cases, how we can execute how we can test the stored procedures. So in the next video, I will show you how we can write the test cases for these stored procedures, whatever we developed. And also I will show you how we can execute those test cases to test this stored procedures. How many ways we can test these stored procedures? Manually and automatically, both. Okay. So that we will see in the next video. That's all for this video, guys. So thanks for watching. In the next video, we will continue this.